Imagine this. You're driving down a quiet country road. The wind is soft, the air smells like pine trees and maple syrup. But you're not in Canada, you're in Vermont. Yet everything around you, the cold weather, the peaceful people, even the politics, feels just a bit Canadian. And what if I told you, Vermont isn't the only one? There are 10 US states that quietly, secretly, feel more at home with Canada than with the rest of America. And today we're going to explore them all, not with fear, not with politics, but with open eyes and open hearts. Let's begin. Number 10, Vermont. Somewhere in New England, between the hills and the hush, lies a state that doesn't quite shout America anymore. It whispers something different. It whispers, Canada. Vermont has always stood out. It was the first state to abolish slavery. It has one of the highest voter participation rates in the United States. And in many ways it's more progressive, more peaceful, more northern. But it's not just the values, it's the way people live. Picture this. In a small town like Montpelier, a Canadian visitor would feel perfectly at home. Vermont has more in common with Quebec than it does with Texas. In fact, it shares a 295-mile border with Canada. And some communities have relatives and roots on both sides. The towns are small, the people are polite, and the politics? Well, that's where things get even more interesting. In 2011, Vermont passed a bill to create a single-payer healthcare system. It was bold, it was big, and it sounded Canadian. While that system was later dropped due to funding issues, the dream never really died. Because Vermonters, like Canadians, believe in community care. And then there's the Second Vermont Republic. A real serious group that, since 2003, has said, maybe we'd be better off as our own country. Or maybe even as part of Canada. At first, people laughed, but the group kept growing. And today, with global tensions rising, with national division sharpening, some are taking the idea more seriously. Farmer, VO. I just want to live somewhere calm. If that means Canada, I'll take it. Economically, Vermont already behaves like a Canadian province. In 2023, it traded over $2.4 billion with Canada, mostly lumber, dairy, and green energy. In terms of education, Vermont's universities collaborate with Canadian schools, and young students from both sides cross the border for special programs. Then there's the culture. In winter, the whole state turns into a Canadian postcard. Skiing, snowshoeing, hot cider, community bonfires. It's more Yukon than Yankee. And the people? Well, as one woman from Brattleboro said, "Woman, we're American, but we're not like loud American. We're more like Canadian American." So will Vermont leave the US? Maybe not today, but if things ever fall apart, politically, socially, economically, Vermont already has one foot over the northern line. And that whisper? It's growing louder. Number 9, Maine. Maine is quiet, rugged, frozen half the year, and closer to New Brunswick than to New York. Maine isn't flashy, but it is deeply tied to Canada. 75% of its border touches Canada. Some towns are so close they share power lines, rivers, and even water systems. Culturally, they're cousins. Locals in Aroostook County speak Acadian French, they celebrate Canadian holidays, and many have dual citizenship. But there's also struggle. Maine has one of the oldest populations in the country. Rural hospitals are closing, schools are merging, and young people are leaving in waves. Locals ask, why are we paying so much for healthcare when just over that border they pay nothing? And the jobs? Many of the old logging mills have shut down. The fishing industry is struggling due to warming waters. Farmers are tired. Canada offers something Maine no longer can: security, stability, a safety net. A recent survey found 42% of Mainers under 30 would consider moving to Canada, not just for jobs, but for values. Would you consider becoming Canadian if it meant better healthcare and a peaceful society? Yes, 42%. And maybe that's what this story is really about, not lines on a map, not laws or flags, but values. As one young mother said while walking her baby near the border, "If Canada ever opened the door, I'd walk through it tomorrow." Number 8, Washington. Washington, not DC, the state. Wild green, soaked in mist. To the north, British Columbia. To the south, California's chaos. So which direction does Washington lean? Some say Washington feels more Canadian than Californian. But why? Let's start with this. Washington has deep trade ties with Canada, especially with the province right next door. Each year, over $20 billion in goods cross that border, from timber and technology to produce and power. The economies are entangled like tree roots. Then there's the cultural overlap. Seattle and Vancouver are sister cities in every way except the passport. The lifestyle is the same, the rain is the same, even the politics are similar. Washingtonians voted for legalized marijuana, higher minimum wages, and stronger climate protection laws. Sound familiar? It should, because Canada already lives this way. One professor at the University of Washington even said, if the United States ever broke apart, Washington and British Columbia would probably just merge. We already speak the same political language. And some Washingtonians feel pulled north in a deeper way. When asked in a 2023 local poll, 38% said they'd consider joining Canada if the US became unstable. Would you support a union with Canada if the US government collapsed? Yes, 38%. Of course, this is all hypothetical, but so was Brexit, so was the fall of the Soviet Union, and sometimes history moves in unexpected directions. Washington may not leave tomorrow, but its eyes are already looking north, towards something quieter, greener, and possibly more stable. Number 7, Minnesota. Minnesota isn't flashy, it's humble, polite, and really, really cold. But that cold, it doesn't stop at the border, because Minnesota shares the Lake of the Woods, a water system, and hundreds of miles of forest with Manitoba and Ontario. Minnesotans and Canadians hunt, fish, ski, and snowmobile across those lines like they don't exist. But it's not just the landscape they share, it's the values. Minnesota has universal pre-K, one of the highest union memberships in the United States, and a healthcare system that almost mimics Canada's, thanks to its expanded Medicaid programs. Even accent-wise, let's be honest, people from Duluth and Winnipeg sound almost identical. Some locals joke, we're just Canadian with better beer. But behind the humor, there's unrest. Minnesota's rural towns are shrinking, healthcare costs are rising, and many feel disconnected from Washington, D.C. A Minneapolis teacher told local media, if America keeps getting louder and meaner, I wouldn't mind slipping quietly into Canada, honestly. And in case you think this is all talk, Minnesota's legislature once debated formal ties with Canadian provinces to share climate policy, power grids, and trade. Sometimes borders are legal, but sometimes they're just lines in the snow. Number 6, Michigan. Michigan is surrounded by water and surrounded by Canada. It shares the longest freshwater border with Canada in the world. And for many in Detroit and Windsor, that border is just a bridge. People cross every day for work, school, and healthcare. Some even live in one country and shop in the other. Culturally, they're woven together. The auto industry spans both sides. So does tourism, education, and even sports loyalty. But now, Michiganders are starting to wonder, what if we were on the wrong side of the line? Because Michigan is hurting. Detroit went bankrupt. Flint's water crisis shocked the world. Factories have closed, and some cities feel forgotten. Canada, by contrast, feels like a lifeline. Windsor has clean water, health coverage, affordable housing. One Flint resident put it this way, I used to dream of moving to Florida. Now I dream of crossing to Canada. It might sound dramatic, but when life gets hard, people look for safety, and for some in Michigan, safety lies north.
Number 5, Alaska. Alaska is cold, wild, and far away from the rest of America. But guess who lives right next door? Canada. Alaska is closer to Yukon and British Columbia than to California or Texas, and if you drive out of Alaska, you have to go through Canada. But it's more than geography. In many ways, Alaska already acts Canadian. The healthcare system there, heavily government supported, and in some towns, Canada helps fund medical flights and emergency support. The culture? Very similar. Alaskans hunt, fish, and trap just like folks in Yukon. And the way they speak, live, and work is often more Canadian than American. And here's the biggest reason: oil and gas. Alaska and Canada work together on Arctic energy projects, pipelines cross their borders, and both face the same climate risks. Alaskans are independent, but they're also realistic. Some say if the United States government collapsed or stopped funding Alaska's massive infrastructure needs, joining Canada might be smarter than surviving alone. An Alaskan tribal elder once said, "We already live more like Yukon people than Washington people. If America fades, we'll go where the land makes sense." For now, Alaska stays American, but its soul might already belong to the North. Number 4, New Hampshire. New Hampshire is small, peaceful, and full of forests and old stone towns. But look at the map. New Hampshire hugs the border with Quebec and New Brunswick, and across that border, people speak French, grow apples, and live just like New Hampshireites. Here's the thing, New Hampshire is independent-minded. Its motto is live free or die. And many there feel tired of Washington, D.C., tired of big government, tired of culture wars, tired of fighting. In 2023, a group of New Hampshire voters actually proposed seceding from the U.S. It didn't pass, but 13% of voters said yes. That might not sound like much, but it's the highest in the country, and guess where many of them said they'd prefer to join? Canada. Why? Free healthcare, low crime, polite politics, and a way of life that feels calm. One former state senator said, if America burns itself out, New Hampshire would fit into Canada like a puzzle piece. New Hampshire may be quiet, but its people are thinking, and if things fall apart, they may quietly slip across the border and never look back. A forest road leading into the mist with a sign that reads, Bienvenue, welcome to Canada.
Number 3, Oregon. Oregon is known for its beauty, mountains, rivers, forests, and a quiet spirit of rebellion. But today, many Oregonians feel tired. Tired of division, tired of DC drama, tired of being pulled in two directions. Here's the thing, Western Oregon is very progressive, but Eastern Oregon, very conservative. And both sides are frustrated. Some eastern counties want to leave Oregon altogether. Some even talk about joining Idaho. But others, especially on the coast, are asking a different question. What if we just joined Canada? Why Canada? Because it already shares Oregon's values. Climate protection, public health care, gun safety, peaceful protests, and free college programs in many provinces. One Oregonian said, Canada isn't perfect, but it's calm. They argue less and take care of each other more. Also, Oregon trades heavily with Canada, over $6 billion a year in goods, lumber, wine, tech, clean energy. And the biggest tie, Portland and Vancouver, Canada's version, are sister cities in spirit. Bikes, books, green roofs, protests with flowers. So, what would happen if things fell apart in America? If climate disasters, political collapse, or civil unrest made things unstable? Some Oregonians say Canada might be the last lifeboat, and if that day comes, they'll paddle north. Number 2, Illinois. Illinois is home to Chicago, one of the biggest, busiest, and most influential cities in America. But Illinois isn't just a city-state, it's also progressive, international, and socially aligned with countries like Canada. Why Canada? Because Illinois supports strong gun control, free or affordable healthcare, climate action, immigrant rights, and polite, practical politics. And here's what matters. Illinois trades heavily with Ontario, Quebec, and Manitoba. In fact, Canada is Illinois' #1 export market. Chicago is also closer in spirit to Toronto than to many southern U.S. states. They share a love for music, diversity, global business, and urban planning. If the U.S. were to fall into chaos, a broken healthcare system, civil unrest, or extreme partisanship, many in Illinois might look north and say, Canada makes more sense. And here's a real twist. Some experts have suggested that if the U.S. splits, a Great Lakes Federation, including Ontario and Illinois, could rise. Chicagoans are proud to be American, but if the country breaks apart, Canada may be the safest, smartest place to anchor next. Number 1, California. California is massive, rich, diverse, powerful, but something is shifting beneath the surface. It's not just earthquakes, it's frustration. California has its own way of life, and more people are wondering, do we even belong in the United States anymore? The state has nearly 40 million people, a bigger economy than most countries, and politics that often clash with Washington, D.C. Many Californians believe in climate action, universal health care, diversity and human rights, peaceful diplomacy. In recent years, serious movements have called for California's peaceful independence. And if California ever chose to leave, where would it turn? Canada is high on that list. Canada shares its values and its future: tech, climate goals, clean energy, and a more inclusive way of life. If the U.S. were to fall apart politically, California has the resources, the mindset, and the momentum to go its own way, maybe even north. And if that happens, the world won't be surprised. They'll say, California was ready. From Hawaii's drifting islands to California's rising power, and everywhere in between, Americans are quietly asking, what if we left? This isn't about red or blue anymore, it's about peace, stability, a future worth believing in. As the U.S. feels more divided than ever, some look north, toward Canada. Others look outward, to places that feel more kind, more fair, more human. The story isn't over, it's just beginning, because sometimes, love for your country means knowing when it's time to let go. If this story touched your heart, if you feel the quiet pain behind the smiles, you're not alone. Click like if you believe people deserve peace, wherever they live. Comment below. Where would you go If your country no longer felt like home, subscribe to join us, as we explore the stories others are too afraid to tell. Together we're not just viewers, we're voices, we're hearts, we're the future, choosing light over fear.